parties involved. We are all in support, so I commend the bill to the House and look forward to the submissions in the Select Committee.
I call Gareth Hughes.
Kia ora, Madam Speaker. Ngā mihi nui kia koutou kia ora. The last member asked for certainty. This government will act on climate change. You can have that certainty. This government's not going to keep throwing tens of millions of dollars of taxpayers' subsidies at the oil industry. You have that certainty. This government isn't going to open coal mines on the conservation estate. You can have that certainty. This government isn't going to mine Schedule 4. You can have that certainty. This government acts on the most pressing issue, which our Prime Minister says is our nuclear-free moment, the greatest issue of our generation. You have that certainty, Melissa Lee. It's important to act because the issue we're talking about is our kids, their kids, but not just that, and this threatened species. It's literally countries like Tuvalu, Kiribati, the Seychelles, Mauritius, that climate change is affecting right now. And that's why when we talk about certainty, let's talk about the important things, which is cultural extinction, our neighbours and whānau in the Pacific, our planet, our home. So look, while we're debating this legislation, let's also not forget the certainty of the last government, which was a government which would throw between $46 and $80 million a year in tax breaks for the oil industry. I remember when Phil Heatley, the Minister for Energy and Resources, blew $240,000 on a weekend, hosting just 10 oil executives from offshore.
Order. Can we come back to the bill, please?
My point, Madam Speaker, is that the government threw all the support at the industry, but what did we see? We saw Shell surrender their permits, Anadarko's left, Petrobras left, Apache's left. In fact, over the last 5 years, more permits have been surrendered, twice as many than granted. And this is the issue, because what we're seeing is oil companies flee New Zealand despite all national support, and now we have to deal with this loophole, which was their Crown Minerals Act problem. Now, Madam Speaker, the issue, of course, this legislation deals with, the loophole, is that approvals needed for a change of permit operator, but if someone changes the company, buys it out, you don't need that approval. It's a good technical common sense change, which I'm glad to see all parties support in this parliament. This bill increases the penalties from $200,000 to $800,000. Now that reminds me when we saw our greatest maritime environmental disaster, the Rena, where we saw 300 tonnes of oil wash up on our beaches, hundreds of millions of dollars of environmental damages, and the maximum penalty under National's RMA at the time, $150,000. So this legislation overnight is increasing the penalties for those who don't inform the government and the appropriate agencies for a change of permit operator is more than the entire costs that were recovered under the RMA for our greatest ever environmental disaster that trashed that beach. That broke my heart, seeing those oil blobs wash up on those beaches and those dead birds in those baskets. And at the same time, National was doing everything they could to attract those oil companies down to New Zealand. But they've fled, and now we have to fix this loophole. I do want to respond to some of the comment in this debate, because I heard the member, National's spokesperson for the oil industry, Jonathan Young, who said we need to preserve the reputation of this industry. What reputation? I've seen the groundwater contamination under the Kapuni wells. I've been in Taranaki backyards where the night turns into day because of the constant flaring. I've talked to landowners affected with the sham access agreements that were signed. I've been in those small rural valleys where National voters with tears in their eyes came to tell me how cowboys in the oil industry had ripped their rural community apart because there weren't guidelines. I've seen the fracking without consent in Taranaki. I've seen the oil spills off the Taranaki Bight from the industry. So don't come here and talk about our reputation when there's unmediated, unfixable groundwater pollution in Taranaki. Don't come talking about that when I came to this house with photographs showing cows literally wading in oil and gas and fracking waste because it was easier to get a consent to drill a water bore than it was to frack for oil and gas. So when we're talking about protecting the reputation of an industry, let's have facts. And what we've seen over decades in this country is an industry that's only act when it's pushed, an industry that hasn't acted and hasn't garnered that social licence. Madam Speaker, it's important to fix our regulatory regime. So while we're amending the Crown Minerals Act tonight with a small technical amendment, we also need to keep our eye on the bigger picture, which is the purpose of the underlying legislation, the Crown Minerals Act. which is, as we've heard in the debate tonight, to promote oil drilling and extractive activities in New Zealand. Now, I would rather, and I'm urging the government to adopt, a regime where the purpose actually is the safe and sustainable resource extraction, making sure we have a world-leading regulatory regime, not just an agency which is promoting drilling, mining, fracking. I've heard members of the opposition say that they're scared of potential hypothetical maybe amendments that might come at some future point. It's entirely hypothetical. What I do remember, though, is the urgency they put this Parliament in to pass the egregious Anadarko Amendment, where their agency for oil promotion was charging activists. A government that came under urgency to pass it. A government that was so incredibly hopeless that had to introduce a Crown Minerals Amendment Bill to fix the mistakes they saw. So, Madam Speaker, I'm proud to be standing with all parties in Parliament tonight voting for this legislation, but let's keep our eye on the big issue, which is the issue of climate change, which is the issue of making sure we've got a robust regime and sustainable industries in New Zealand. But let's keep our eye on the issue and actually look at the facts and make sure that we do protect those farmers, the school, which is within 500 metres of an oil and gas facility right now today in Taranaki, which wouldn't be allowed across the ditch in New South Wales. Let's keep our eye on those big issues as we debate this small technical amendment, which, albeit, is a step forward. Kia ora.
I call Brett Hudson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise to also support this Crown Minerals Amendment Bill.